Ladies and gentlemen, Tarks Gauntlet here, and I am actually invisible. Subscribe for more magic. Twitter, Discord, Instagram, my second channel, all in the description below. Thanks. Was it convincing? Anyway, here's some games I've been playing, like usual. Time code's in the description. Let me know below what you guys have been playing too, and let's get right into it. Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX is my favorite mainline Final Fantasy game, and on my first replay in nearly 15 years, I feel this impression still holds up. That said, it is easier to see the ways in which games have progressed for the better, and where Final Fantasy IX's era-centric flaws hit a little harder than they used to. Before we continue, however, I just want to mention this is a smaller sample of a much larger video I'm currently working on, or have maybe already made depending on when this gets uploaded. So if you want to hear more about Final Fantasy IX from me, check the channel for the main event. To start, I gotta say this is probably my favorite story and adventure in the mainline series, and that's largely why I hold it so dear. Final Fantasy IX starts tenderly with Vivi, and contrasts his introduction with Zidane's bombastic opening mission to kidnap the Princess of Alexandria, Garnet. Between these three characters, we have what's essentially the A cast of playable characters, and their character journeys are immense, beautiful, painful, tragic, and uplifting. The B cast of playable characters, however, is more of a mixed bag, ranging from the always entertaining Steiner to the somewhat underutilized Amarant. Final Fantasy IX is a bit on the shorter side for JRPGs these days, but the adventure flows at a decent pace, and it has one of the strongest closes I think the series has ever seen. It always leaves me feeling the rawness of its conclusion long after the credits end. Combat is more or less standard for ATB, with an interesting weapon-based gimmick for gaining new skills, but the ATB system could stand to be a little more refined, feeling overly slow a great deal of the time. This is where the remaster could have, or rather should have, stepped it up a bit, but didn't. As a remaster, which is what I'm playing here today, it comes with a couple bells and whistles, such as the ability to turn off random encounters, or adjust all character damage to 9,999. These are nice additions, but the remaster itself is frankly a giant missed opportunity that Square should have tried harder on. The graphics have not been cleaned up to the extent they should have been, and performance still feels like playing the PS1 version, which I guess is authentic to the original, but I don't think anybody really wanted the subpar frame rates of the original represented again. Anyways, I'm not going to say all too much more about Final Fantasy IX. I have a much bigger video for that, so I'll leave it at this. Final Fantasy IX is one of my favorite games, and one of the games I consider most important to me growing up. If you want to play it today, it's still well worth it, even with its rough edges. There are very few fantasy worlds in video games as majestic and inspiring as this one. I highly recommend the game, but I recommend it more on PC than anywhere else, where at least modders have done the job Square always should have. Ender Lilies. Ender Lilies is a fantastic 2D Metroidvania. At a glance, it may be difficult to understand what sets it apart from other genre titles. Combat-wise, it looks and feels similar to many others, albeit with more abilities gathered along the way in the form of spirits that attack on your behalf. The art style and zones also, while fantastic, may not look like they stand out too much. However, the game tells a very delicate and tender story in a corrupted world, quite unlike most Metroidvanias. A corrupted world slowly losing itself to blight and evil. This tenderness is felt throughout all aspects of the game. Our main character being a small girl in a large world solidifies the feeling immediately, but the music and sound design capitalize on this effect to equal degree. The sound and music are light and airy, lending a contrasting feeling of childlike innocence to the ever-corrupting world around you. That said, there's a couple interesting things to note here. Though the sound design works wonderfully to emphasize the unique world feel, it doesn't telegraph attacks as well as one might expect. The music as well, seemingly by design, borrows leitmotifs from famous movies and songs quite often, and it can be a little distracting, especially if you're like me and start to wonder if there's a narrative connection you're supposed to be making to Mary Poppins, of all things.
Nowhere is there a more happier crew Then them Watsons chim-chim, chiroo.
That all said, the game itself is fantastic and handles its progression amazingly well. There's loads of hidden paths, and new powers give you ample reason to backtrack and re-explore older areas. It doesn't take too long to beat the game, maybe 13 hours if you already know the path, but a blind run is likely closer to 18 to 20 hours, and to 100% the game you're looking at around 22. The objectives also to 100% the game aren't very difficult to pull off, and I found great joy in doing it. Ender Lilies is an exceptional Metroidvania, though it doesn't do too much out of the norm in terms of its gameplay mechanics or even level and set design. That gentle, delicate, tender feeling that permeates the whole experience really sets it apart, and it is something I find makes it leave a longer lasting impression than its contemporaries. It is a game I highly recommend to Metroidvania fans. Tears of the Kingdom. So this is basically the episode of Masterpieces, I guess, which Tears of the Kingdom basically is. But there's a caveat here. Coming from Breath of the Wild, I already knew I liked this world and the weapon durability based combat system. And yes, I am a defender of the weapon durability system. For me, it's what breathes life into this combat, but I get why people don't love it that much. I really enjoyed exploring in Breath of the Wild, finding landmarks and shrines, a billion Koroks, towns, NPCs, whatever. Tears of the Kingdom takes those aspects of the first game and expands and improves upon them with crazy new abilities that just stoke my imagination. The God Hand ability that allows you to craft machines and devices is honestly amazing, and it just fuels my creativity. I love this ability to death, even if my creations always backfire on me once I ask my favorite inevitable question. What if rockets? Yeah, that never works out. The ability to fuse weapons together or fuse them with other materials to change their properties, damage output, and extend their durability is also super useful and transforms the experience in ways that alter your moment-to-moment gameplay. And of course, the Ascend ability, an ability that launches Link to almost any ceiling and allows him to travel through solid objects and pop out on the other side. These are all really cool things unique to Tears of the Kingdom. Bosses and dungeons I also felt were better and more realized than in Breath of the Wild. In almost every way, as a matter of observation, I feel Tears of the Kingdom was a better game than Breath of the Wild, and my over 200 hours of playtime probably reflects how much I enjoyed my time here. However, once again, coming from that Breath of the Wild perspective, things just didn't hit as hard the second time around. When I first explored this world in Breath of the Wild, I felt a magical draw to the exploration. But that's lightning that for me did not really strike twice. At least the lightning doesn't strike the same place twice, and this is, in fact, despite numerous remixes to the map, the same place. Exploring Tears of the Kingdom did not have the same magic for me. If I never played Breath of the Wild, it may have, but as it is, it felt in many ways like I was replaying Breath of the Wild instead of playing a new game. That said, Tears of the Kingdom does offer new areas to explore. There is 2 new maps, one for the sky and one for the underground. The sky map is very sparsely populated and most of it feels copied and pasted around the map, but it does offer variety to exploration and new challenges you don't naturally find on the ground level. The underground is literally the main map but inverted. Big mountains are now deep valleys and deep valleys are big mountains. It's neat, but it gets old fast for me, and I really don't like exploring the dark that much. The underground has some cool challenges and is great for gathering resources, but I don't love the resource-based exploration of it. This area is mostly optional, so it can largely be skipped for people who don't like it, and on that note, I don't feel it needs to be seen as something that detracts from the experience as much, but also, I filled in 100% of all 3 maps. With exception to 3 side quests and the Koroks, I basically 100% of the game. I can't deny I really loved this experience, but I also have this feeling at the back of my mind that I may have enjoyed it even more if it was my first experience in this world, like Breath of the Wild was. Though I will add, as one final note, after my first 40 hours, I actually dropped this game for about 4 months, as I was getting really overwhelmed. But this was entirely self-inflicted, as my dumbass thought I was gonna map the entire underground my first time dropping into it. So a word of advice that nobody needs but me, maybe don't do that. Dusk. Dusk is a game I've been aiming to get at for a while, but just kept putting back and back until eventually Dusk HD released, which had more control and accessibility options than its original release and also a slew of remade assets. Having said that, I actually liked the way OG Dusk looked more and decided to stick with the visuals from that game instead. Dusk is what the world has come to call a boomer shooter, and its shooting is very booming, so I get it. Designed with the original Doom in mind as its basic blueprint, what the game calls to mind most for me is a little remembered FPS called Redneck Rampage. Something about these farmlands and enemies in Plaid just strokes my nostalgia for that game. But that aside, it's a wonderfully realized throwback to simpler times and a stark realization that shooters have gone the wrong way for too long and they need to reverse. Dusk masterfully engages the flow state for me and I just get into it. There's something so refreshing about a weapon that doesn't need a reload. You got a pistol or an SMG with 300 bullets? Well, guess what? That clip has 300 bullets. You just shoot until you run out. It's almost stupid how simplistic and fun this game is. How peeling back the years of advancements for the genre is actually the key to making FPSs super fun again. Who knew? Well, of course there's room for both approaches to the genre. Doom Eternal is basically crack in video game form. But back on Dusk, death can come quick when dealing with the hellish hordes Dusk throws your way, but with swift play and thoughtful weapon selection, there's no challenge you can't overcome. The game offers a decent amount of different weapons and even temporary power-ups at times, such as fast-firing abilities, which works for melee attacks as well, and even a cool ability that puts time into super slow motion so long as you're not moving. With that thing, the game starts to feel a lot like Super Hot, just without the puzzle aspect. Level design, much like the gameplay, is a throwback as well. Rooms and fields linked together by narrow passages and hallways, hidden secrets all over the place, progression tied to keys and switches that validate backtracking through certain stages. Dusk also has the occasional boss that ranges in difficulty from push your shit in to this one's just kind of a joke in a haha funny kind of way. And then the range sometimes extends all the way to this one's just kind of a joke in a haha funny way, but will also push your shit in. At times, Dusk seems to want you to take it seriously as a narrative as well as a simple fun throwback game with impeccable design, but I never felt it hit any stride narratively that made me want to consider the story aspects very deeply at all. Quite simply, it's not what I feel the game's strength was, and the game carried itself amazingly well without it. I highly recommend Dusk to Zoomers who want to understand the people they call boomers, but were actually just millennials. Really, any fan of just fast-paced throwback shooting should get their fix here. The game it's honestly so fucking fun, guys. Dead Space Remake. The question here is, do I talk about this as a game or as a remake? And the answer is, Dead Space has long been my favorite action survival horror game. As a fan of old school survival horrors, the change Resident Evil 4 brought to the genre was one I never fully got on board with. But as a fan of Event Horizon and the Alien films, Dead Space helped me bridge the gap into truly loving this new approach to horror and gameplay. Dead Space is a third-person shooter horror game set on a derelict spaceship overtaken by strange creatures called necromorphs. Unlike your standard shooters where headshots are the key to quick success, Dead Space asks you to aim for the creature's limbs and joints, removing arms to cut down on their attack abilities and removing legs to slow their movement. Without targeting their limbs, you'll find these bastards end up eating through ammo faster than you can replenish it. Of course, different creatures cause you to rethink your strategies, such as some creatures being armored or some creatures actually punishing you for aiming for the wrong and clearly defined limbs. Different weapons are more effective against certain creatures or better at dealing with enemy mobs than others, and you also have stasis abilities to help you out in a pinch. And while that's cool and all, nothing will ever be cooler in this game or any other than the plasma cutter. This is actually my favorite gun in the history of guns in video games. This thing is simple in design, but so rewarding and fun to use. Every shot fires 3 bullets in a line, and with the alt fire button you choose if the line is vertical or horizontal, making it easier to hit specific limbs of your enemies. Back on 360, I beat all 3 Dead Space games using only this weapon for the achievement, and I didn't feel the slightest bit like I had a worse time because of it. This gun is incredibly fun to use, and that puzzle aspect of combat, the level of strategy that aiming for limbs brings, really helps Dead Space stand out from its contemporaries and feels best matched to this gun. As a remake, this game looks exactly how I remember it. But that's the thing, isn't it? We always remember how amazing something looked and felt at the time. And often when we go back, we realize our memories of that thing had become inflated over time. Now don't mistake me here, Dead Space 1 looked great and it aged amazingly. But there's no denying this remake is a proper, fully realized version for the modern day. This is quite possibly the first remake I ever played that felt like it just took my memory of a game and slapped it onto a disc. It's extremely faithful in that regard. But for the players more intimate with the original version, some things may stick out here for better or worse. The most obvious being that Isaac is no longer mute and has a whole new face model. I'm completely on board for the former point and mixed on the latter, as the face doesn't really feel like it matches the Isaac I knew and grew up with. But then you rarely see his face behind that sick suit of armor which provides the game's interface, an interface that, might I add, taught most gamers what the word diegetic meant. Some other changes include entirely redone voice tracks for all the characters, which, while less cartoony than the old versions, I can't say are entirely better either. Not worse, but not better, just different, I guess. There's also some slight changes to level layout that makes backtracking less of an issue and navigating the expanse of the ship much easier. I did, however, hit a recurring glitch, where if I just hit continue instead of loading my file from the main menu, the game would stop displaying quest objectives and the map. But overall, that's the only real thing I have to complain about. Dead Space Remake, if by nothing other than making Isaac no longer mute, is a damn near perfect remake for me, and still one of the best horror shooters ever crafted. It will, however, go back to being the second best if we ever get a remake of Dead Space 2, my favorite from the trilogy. So I give this remake 10 deadly Isaac Clarke stomps out of 10. He really does have the strongest glutes and thighs in the galaxy. It's insane. It's just perfect. So that's just a handful of the games that I had been playing recently, rather the games I'd beaten. For the record, if games show up in videos like this, it means I have beaten them. So let me know below what you guys thought of some of these games. I'm pretty sure Tears of the Kingdom is gonna be a little bit divisive. And also let me know down below what you guys have been playing lately and how you feel about, you know, where your 2024 gaming has been at. But I have daddying to go do, so keeping it brief. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hey. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. There you go. Stop stomping your feet. Yeah. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Tarks Gauntlet here.